Welcome to Running in the 70s, where we interview, meet, and get to know athletes of all kind who were running in the 70s. I'm your host, Matthew Kleinowski. Today on the podcast, we're back in Pennsylvania with a long-term coach who was involved in the sport at various levels all the way through. IUP, my coach for a short time when I had a short career there. Welcome on the podcast today, Dr. Lou Sutton. Welcome.
Thank you.
Let's talk about cross country, the national championship that you hosted.
Okay.
How was the selection made for that? Had it been anywhere near Western Pennsylvania before that you know?
I became involved with the coaching association, and eventually then I became second vice president, and a guy opted out as president. Then I became president of the association. Then we had coaches meetings, and we would meet prior to the national meet the day before and decide where we would go the next year. And I wanted to host it. And I put a bid in, and I took a lot of pictures, and I got Sam Smith, who was a former football coach. He took a camera out to Meadow Lane, and we took all kind of pictures of the course. And then I put them in a scrapbook, and I took them out to the coaches meeting. Then the coaches voted on where they wanted to go, and we were selected. And I had to mow the courts, if you want to hear about.
Yeah, how much work was it? Was it once you won the bid hosting the meet? What was involved?
I got no help from the university or the maintenance staff, but what I did was I went out to Meadow Lane Golf Course, and they agreed that you could hold the meet here, and I would publicize Meadow Lane, and I would build them a big sign to put on the barn. This was at the golf course, saying Meadow Lane Golf Course, among other things. And then I had to cut. They had a farm field that was just grown up with high weeds and everything. And I had to cut about a mile of grass. I had my lawn tractor at home. I would borrow my uncle's pickup truck, and I would drive out, and I would get the grass cut. And actually, I took some of the cross-country runners at that time, and I can't remember who they might have been, but I think maybe Dick Wolf would have been one of them. Where there was water, we put in ditching and put gravel in. Then I had the guy from Meadow Lane, who was the maintenance man, turned out to be a good friend, and he ordered fertilizer for me. We paid for the fertilizer. It wasn't very much at that time. After we got it all cut, then I fertilized the whole thing, about a mile, I suppose about 15 feet wide or so, a path, and then the rest was on the golf course. But I mowed it for 2 years, and I took my son out, and he would help. He was just small at the time, but he would help me mow and trim. I did that for 2 summers until we got the place in real good shape to run on.
How about the measurement? Did the distance have to be precise, and how'd you measure?
We had a measuring wheel, and that's what we used. We kept it down in the equipment cage, and whenever we wanted to measure, it would click off every yard. Yeah. We did it that way, and we did it by hand, by walking around, so that we get our 10,000. I guess at that time that we held it, it was 10,000 meters, I believe. This was in 78, I believe, that we held the national. And as far as I know, there has never been another NCAA national championship of any sport at IUP since I did that or before.
Another large meet was the Penn, Ohio. Do you know the history of that?
Pretty much, yes. I think that I inherited that when I first came. IUP was involved in that, and some of the first races, Gannon University held it at Frontier Park, and Lock Haven had a real good team at that time. I think the first year they may have won. I'm not sure if we were runner-up or where we were, but that's how that worked. And then they would give you so much money. Maybe you would ask for $5,000, but they would trim it and give you 4,000 or less. And also the bus travel, you would have to say how many miles it was to Edinburgh if that's where you were running, and then you were going to take a bus and what passenger bus you needed, and based on mileage, then how much that would be. All these things had to be done and presented to the student co-op for.
One thing I remember in my freshman year there, we did a couple Winnebago
Mm-hmm.
down south.
Okay. Yes. Yeah, we raised that money somehow, and I'm not sure how we raised it, but we weren't covered over the spring breaks when we went any place. The university didn't give us money. We had to make money on our own. I remember one time we raffled off a
bike,
a 10-speed bicycle. Yeah.
I remember that very clearly because I had no money to my name. I knew that if I sold the maximum number of tickets, I was going to get all the food money I needed and everything else. I sold a lot of tickets for that bike.
Well, it's good you remember that, because I'm foggy on some of those things. But we raised the money for the Winnebagos, and I went down to a place south of Pittsburgh. I can't think of the name of the town. If I had a map, I would know right away. But they rented Winnebagos, and I rented two of them. We had to just account for everything, but they didn't want to give us any money. I said, we can't have a good program if the kids are all home and they're away from practice for 10 days. How are we going to compete when we want to be in good shape? And that was an incentive, too, to recruit. I would say, look, here's where we've been. We went to nationals this year, and our team was out in Montana or Arkansas or wherever we were. I was just recently looking on a map, and I think that over the years I had taken teams to over 30 different states out of 50.
Wow. Let's talk about one particular. I'll pick out the athlete. Let's talk about Jim Wooding as an Olympian. Do you remember recruiting, meeting, bringing him
Yes,
in, and his experience as an athlete?
I do. I saw where he had finished tying the state. I think maybe he was, I don't know if he won the state, but I think he was at least second in the quarter mile. I had invited him up to campus, and he came with his mother. And I explained the program. I took him all around. I thought he would really make a good recruit. And when he left the parking lot and I walked him out to the car, and she says, Jim, here's where you're going to spend the next 4 years of your life. I was really happy about that.
Yeah.
Because I thought he was a key to our success.
Yeah, right away. He won this 440 or the 400 meters 4 years in a row, right? Starting from a freshman, I know, in track.
I believe he did, yes.
And then, of course, high jump, decathlon, all kind of things. What was your relationship as a university coach? What kind of relationship did you have with Jim as an example of relationship with students?
And when I last talked to Jim when he was in China this past fall, he called me and he said, you were my second family. You and your wife were my second family at IUP. And he says, I'll always remember you for that. So I was deeply touched.
Yeah, that's great.
So I helped him. He had some problems the first year. I helped him stay in school. I helped him through a couple courses. He was in physical education. I wanted to make sure that he came back. I think he had come to summer school in order to do it. But once he got his feet on the ground, then he was fine.
There was a 12 credit per semester you had to pass to maintain eligibility.
The NCAA set the requirements.
What was your relationship and how did you coordinate the team of coaches for track? There were field
Okay.
coaches, there were
Yeah.
throwing
Yeah.
coaches,
Yeah.
sprinting coaches, distance coaches.
Yeah. This is good. As far as Mr. Fry went, I guess the first year that I coached, or the second year, he took a leave of absence, I believe, and went out to finish a master's degree in the Midwest. And then he came back and he saw that I had recruited a good crop of runners, Don Slusser, Bill Hampton, Doug Canan, Jake Sorg, all who were just on the borderline of being really good. But he saw the potential there, and he came down and he said he would offer his services. He would coach gratis, no pay, but he wanted to get back involved. So I said, sure, you've been very successful yourself. And so he was a good coach. And then Dr. Raymore walked down on the track and he introduced himself and he said, would you want some help with the sprint? I said, what are your qualifications? He said, in 1958, I won the state championship in the 100, the 200, and 400, and was only the second individual to ever achieve this in the state of Pennsylvania. He was a dentist, and he said he ran for Villanova and was there on a track scholarship, and he had some extremely impressive times. And I said, yeah, I'd be delighted for you to help. I said, there's no money. He said, that's okay. I'll do it for free. When you look at somebody's mouth and throat all day long, he said, you need something else to do, and that's a good diversion for me. He said, I'd love to help. He was a godsend as well. Then I was lucky enough to hire Roy Grove on a part-time basis. When I was intramural director, he supervised the team sports like the flag football and the basketball and things like that. I had known him since I was a freshman in college because we were in school together, and he was extremely conscientious individual. And I thought he was also the head coach at Indiana High School track and field. And so I got him over there, and I was able to get him a part-time job, and he did get paid as assistant. So he took over the field program. He was the head field coach. And of course, he and I would consult all the time. Then the guy from continuing ed came down, and his name was Brian McHugh. And he said, I threw the shot put for the University of Illinois. I would like to work with the field guys. And I had a staff of, I was paid and Roy Grove was paid, and the other three were volunteer. But we had a staff that would be second to none in Division II. So the only thing lacking, I think, was the money. Had we had a little bit of scholarship money to entice some top-notch athletes, why we might have done a little bit better. But with what we had and the recruits coming in, we were able to have a very well-rounded program.
Very cool. Let me ask you, what about the recognition and honors you received?
I was, I guess, lucky enough to win the NAIA district meets in cross country and track and field many times over. I was named a coach there, a coach of the year. And then the national meet, after I held that, I was, it wasn't publicized, but I was runner up to the Division II National Coach of the Year in cross country. And I was named Coach of the Year at least 5 times in cross country for winning the state PSAC meet. And I was named twice, I think 76 and 77, as Coach of the Year for Northeastern United States and the NAIA both years for track and field. and I was inducted into the Indiana County Hall of Fame back in the early 90s, and then inducted into the IUP Hall of Fame. I think it was in 2001.
Reflecting back, how important and how satisfying were those recognition and honor bits?
I don't think that was that important. Of course, I think probably the biggest honor would be being selected for the IUP Hall of Fame. Mm-hmm. But I was more interested in the success of the program. I didn't make a big deal out of it. I really think the accomplishments, other than the kids being very good, I think that there's a carryover from any sport into regular life. Mm-hmm. For example, myself, I think that being an athlete and a college athlete, that it gave me a fortitude to stick with things and just be a winner. I was very competitive, and I think that I still am competitive. I try to play golf to the best of my ability, but with my age, I'm not very good at all. But I'm still out there trying. Yeah. I think that just the intestinal fortitude and of course the relationships that you have with students, and hopefully they're good and they learn something from you. They learn something from life. They know how to be a competitor. They know how to win graciously, and also how to lose in the proper manner. I just think that athletics gives you something to your character that you carry with you all your life. I think this carryover too into the occupations you go into. I look back and I see some of you guys that have done so well, and I think, wow, in some little way, maybe I had something to do with that. Yeah. But the recruiting and all, and why they came to IUP, and what they're doing now, and sometimes I'm just amazed.
Yeah, the twists and turns and the paths of our lives are made by these sometimes seemingly small decisions, sometimes big decisions along the way that make the difference. That's true. Let's talk about the nature of the sport. Any reflections from the 50s through the end of the 70s? The sport, of course, the specter of performance-enhancing drugs, money, sponsorship, public awareness. What were there sea changes in the sport that you were aware of at the time or see differently now?
One of the biggest things that I see right now relates to the conditions of the track. The facilities are just outstanding. IUP's had about 3 different resurfacings of the track. We were pretty archaic compared to the things that they have today. We lined the track back when we had spinners. I said, how do you guys line the track? And he said, we take a motorcycle, and one guy sits on the backwards, and we have a coffee can, and we pinch that coffee can in a little bit, and I drive along real slow, and we put the line down on the track. So nowadays you wouldn't hear of such a thing. Or we didn't have starting blocks, so when you didn't have starting blocks, well, you just dug a hole in the cinders, put your feet in the 2 holes, and that's how you started for the sprints. And things today, I just marvel with the timing, the automatic timing. And I always said when computers first came out, give me 3 good student secretaries and I'll beat a computer at any time. You think about how things are done today, and everything's so automatic, the automatic timing. I can remember that back in the early 70s. I think about the last year that we went to Billings, Montana, around 71 or 72, when they were talking about we're going to have automatic timing, just like the horse races, they were saying. And how were they going to determine 1 and 8, and how are they going to pick them out, and how are they going to do this? And that was all in the works at that time. And what it is today, and they flash up on the screen when you're watching a track meet, after they're done. Their time right down to the hundredth of the second.
Yeah.
So that's a big thing. I don't know much about the rules now. I haven't really kept up with them. I know that when you transfer, like for example, football and so forth, you're eligible immediately from one school to another. And that didn't happen. You had to sit out a year if you were transferring. And even if you were transferring from, I think, Division One to Division Two, you became eligible right away, but not when I was coaching. Things like that have changed. And this money situation, I really don't think is good. I don't see why a student couldn't get a job on campus and they pay them that way about all these endorsements and paying athletes and so forth. I think that ruins the spirit of the whole competition.
Back then, I think may have been that the Olympics were still completely amateur, which is completely different now. Yeah. I remember being on the track. My high school team had a 2-mile relay that was good, and we ran at the Indiana Invitational. That was the first time I had come there. And we ran on the hard surface track. It was crazy.
Yes, it was,
Now, retired from coaching and teaching, but you have left a legacy with the IUP running program through the scholarship. What about that?
I thought we had nothing. We didn't have two nickels to rub together, and that if I ever had some money, that I would give back to the university. And I never did because I had a wife, 4 kids. They all went to IUP. They all graduated. I had to pay for them, and a couple of them went back to graduate school, and they stayed at home. And finally, when they were all out of the house, and I was able to save a little bit of money, and I thought that would be a good thing to do, and to let a little legacy there. I contributed, and I plan to add to that contribution each year as long as I can, so that kids don't have to go through some of the things that they had to go through. Maybe this is going to help somebody, and maybe in turn then those people that get the scholarship and they get out, maybe they'll think about the program and be able to give back. It's just a small thing that the scholarship will be endowed, but perpetual, that it'll just work off the interest. The first one I think will be given out this spring. And it's to be given to somebody who's in need. I didn't want some millionaire's son to get it just to say he had a scholarship, but there are a lot of kids that really do need the money. So hopefully there would be somebody that's interested in coaching or teaching. It doesn't have to be, and it'd be for a male, because I think the female department has enough money, or has a lot of money because of Title IX, but the men have virtually just about nothing. So I think there's another scholarship. I think Dr. Raymore left a scholarship, and of course there's the Fry Scholarship that was started by Dave Motti, who was the fundraiser at IUP at the time.
Well, it's a nice career, a nice legacy. Are there any other athletes who were just awe-inspiring, or any other people that you encountered through this career in Western Pennsylvania that you came in contact with that were especially memorable, either personally or with their athletic performance? We mentioned Jim Wooding.
Oh, yeah, Ron Steele would be someone that would be memorable. He was a good sprinter and a member of the Hall of Fame, and a number of javelin throwers. But I think we had close to 30 different All-Americans. So there's so many kids that I guess I could mention. First cross-country recruiting year that I had was good, and there's so many good distance runners. It would be hard just to pick out just a few. So I would think that I probably, if I looked through the record book, I could pick out some others, but I know.
How often do you think about track and field or your career? You have a big extended family, several generations now. You've left the area.
It's a funny thing that you should ask, because I just had a dream the other night about coaching. So I'm still
Not a
coaching.
nightmare. Not a nightmare, right?
No, it wasn't a nightmare, but it was close to it. The athletic department had, I think the football people had taken my office and put me in with a part-time volleyball coach, and I couldn't find my materials and my books and things like that. I was hunting for the football coach to ask him how he had the authority and where my office was and what was going on here. Eventually I woke up and I was happy that I wasn't coaching, but incidentally, I've been retired exactly on January 1st. I mentioned this yesterday to the golfers, exactly 25 years.
Wow.
And that's from teaching. But my last year of coaching was 1987. So that was, 36 or 37 years ago.
I'm sure there'll be a lot of people who ran on your teams and ran against your teams that will get to hear this podcast and like hearing some of the insights you had, especially that decade of the 70s. Yeah, maybe there needs to be a book or a movie somebody writes, talks to a bunch of people called Coach's Dreams. Maybe that's a whole insight. Have you ever thought of working with someone to write your story?
Yeah, I have thought about it. Like an autobiography. One of my friends who was a professor in the English department wrote his memoirs. And then also one of the guys, Jack Benedict, who does the sports for IU still to this day. He's almost as old as I am, still does all the basketball and football announcing. He has written his memoirs and had a guy from English and another department edit his edition. But I got the guy who I used to fish with, the English professor. He gave me his book, and he published so many issues. And we talked about this, and I said, I don't think I would have enough. He says, you would have plenty to write about. I read his book. It was very well done. But Randy Jessic was our public relations director, and he edited this Jack Benedict's book. And I got a book from Jack Benedict of what he wrote. Not long, maybe 125 or 150 pages. But I got to thinking the other day that from childhood on, I could do something, but I'd have to have some help. But
Yeah, I know there are people that could help. It's been great talking to you. I think it was very nice. I'm sure a lot of people who knew you from IUP didn't know some of your background and some of your experiences before you were at IUP. So it's great to go through that and talk about that history. Good stories.
Thank you. And I would invite anybody that would like to contribute to the scholarship fund to do so if they have the means.
So they can just contact the IUP athletic department. How is the best place for
Yeah.
people to find out that detail?
That should be through the newsletter that's being published. They started a new newsletter from the track office, and it would have that information in it.
Hopefully when people hear this will kick some people into taking action if they haven't. That's great. Thanks for your time, Dr. Sutton. It's great to reconnect. It's a long time.
Thank you, Matt. I enjoyed the conversation, and good luck to you, and it was certainly good to hear from you.
All right. Thanks.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Okay.
All right, bye-bye.
You too. Bye.
I hope you enjoyed another episode of Running in the 70s. Voices, stories, and memories of athletes who were running in the 70s. Until next time, wherever you are, keep looking forward and don't forget to look back.